And it's Ken Kraetzer for CBSI Services Talking Business. Today, in conjunction with the Chase Alumni Association, we profile the career of a good friend of ours, Mario Rosellini, who was a vice president, division executive, working on insurance projects, working to develop the bank's risk management capability. We have a chance to hear about some of the projects he worked on, many of his colleagues that he served with, and also some of the changes that he witnessed in banking and insurance in his tenure. Hear about helping the Chenery family with the great racehorses, Riva Ridge and Secretariat, a very warm story about working with David Rockefeller, the face of really American banking for many years, working with so many colleagues at the bank. Some of the key things he sees today as big needs: enterprise risk management and cyber risk management. And have a chance to hear about what Mario is working on now, a couple of terrific charities in New Jersey, the Chilton Medical Center, the Lions Club, which helps children who are visually impaired, and his alma mater, Seton Hall University. So let's go out to North Jersey Country Club in Wayne and talk with Mario Rosellini.
And I ran into my course accounting professor from Seton Hall University. His name was Don Baldica, who at that time evidently was the controller at Chase. And he asked me what I was doing. I told him what I was doing. I said I'd like to get into the corporate business side. He said, I think we have an opening in our insurance area, and I'll set up a meeting for you. And he did. Subsequent to that day, I had the meeting, and Chase hired me. It was Tom Clavey, who was the head of that department, who was assistant secretary of the bank. Ray Brady, who was the number 2 guy, and Walter Cahill was the number 3 guy. All interviewed me.
And Mario Rosellini, tell us a little bit about some of the stops within Chase. You had a career primarily in insurance, but what were some of the departments that you worked in at the bank? With in your tenure?
One of the interesting things about working in our department was we worked with every department within the bank, domestically and internationally. So you really got to learn about every operation. And one of the areas within the corporate insurance area or department that we worked with was the trust and estate area. And I personally got involved in handling the insurance on all the trust assets, whether they be corporate assets or personal assets. One of the most interesting opportunities I had was in the horse racing area. When we became the trustee, the Chris Chenery estate. Chris owned a big racing operation stable called Meadow Stud in Doswell, Virginia, on 3,000 acres. So in order
3,000 acres, wow.
3,000. So in order for me to learn what had to be done with that operation, I went down to the site, talked to Mrs. Chenery, learned about who was the daughter of Chris, was actually running the operation. And she explained to me what they did down there with the breeding and other areas. And then I made sure that we had all the insurance that was required for the for the breeding operation. And then later on, 2 of their horses, very famous. One was Riva Ridge, who won the first 2 parts of the Triple Crown, and then Secretariat, who later on won the Triple Crown.
One of the most famous horses of all time.
Probably the best horse of all. I think he holds all the records. And what they needed to do was to protect the estate from estate taxes, have enough money to make sure they had the money to pay those taxes. So when Secretariat finished his racing career and he won the Triple Crown, the family went out and they syndicated the horse. Part of the syndication was primarily for breeding. So Secretariat and Riva Ridge were both syndicated, and one of the concerns was if they didn't pass their fertility test, the investors could pull out of the syndication agreement. So I actually had some contacts in the horse racing or thoroughbred insurance area. Talked to one of my friends who actually worked with me at Liberty Mutual, and we decided that based on their bloodlines, that both of them had an opportunity of not passing. So he suggested to me that we should get fertility insurance, which I subsequently recommended to the family, and they agreed that it made sense, and we purchased it. So happened that both horses flunked their fertility test, and Lloyd's of London actually took over Riva Ridge's ownership, but nobody pulled out of Secretariats, and the estate continued on owning him and put him out for breeding. And then the family was very happy that we bought that insurance to protect them. It worked out well.
So you were really the hero of that movie.
Yeah, I was. Well, I got to meet Mrs. Tweedy. I got to meet Mrs. Lucian Lauren, the trainer.
Yeah.
And in fact, after he won the Triple Crown and before they retired him, they had a race called the Marlboro Cup. And that was horses on the West Coast challenged Secretariat and Riva Ridge, said they were much better horses out there, that he didn't race against them. So they had this Marlboro, was like a match, basically, the West Coast against those two horses. And I got invited to that race with my son, actually, by the trust officer. And both horses came in first and second, demolished the West Coast horses. I'll never forget that. And that was really exciting. So every time I read about Secretariat, hear about Secretariat, I saw the movie like 10 times already. It brings back memories.
Well, that's terrific. The Chenery family lived in the town. I grew up in Pelham, New York, and it's an exciting part of Pelham history. Penny Tweedy, very well known and respected in the area. Now, Mayor Rosellini, you helped Chase on a major project in a difficult time and received a presidential award from Chase on your efforts, and you met a lot of senior executives of the bank, and it really kind of helped your career. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, first of all, the one thing that we did at Chase was, and I always had that family feeling, that you were always welcome to talk to all the senior officers, whether it be even David Rockefeller, Tom Lebrecht, Mike Esposito, Bill Ogden, Art Ryan, no matter who, Tony Carraciano, you were always welcomed to go into their offices and speak to them. And in fact, many of them would go down to the cafeteria in the morning and have breakfast with employees because they'd like to learn what was going on in the bank. So I would say that because of that relationship, you were able to get things done a lot quicker, and you would get a feeling as to what direction those officers wanted you to go, and they would help you get your accomplishments completed. Mike Esposito was my immediate boss at the time, and on this one particular was a commercial loan that was in bad shape. Actually, it was going into bankruptcy, had no assets. And the lending officer asked me to look at any opportunities. And I checked back and I found out that there was a loss. And I think it was a ship loss. And we were always protected under a mortgagee clause. Under that mortgagee clause, which we made sure was in every contract, we as a bank had rights to proceeds to pay off up to our mortgage balance. Nobody could supersede those rights. So therefore, we were never notified that this this ship had a loss. They paid out to the owners, but never paid anything, never gave us asked for approval from the bank. So we went back in, we put in a request to have the insurance proceeds paid to us. Actually, they denied paying the mortgagors their losses because they weren't paying a premium, evidently. So the fact that we weren't notified, we put in a claim under our rights, we got the whole debt paid off. So I guess Mike thought that was sufficient enough. They would put me in for a presidential award, and that particular year was one of like 5 people throughout the organization that got the presidential award. And then they had dinner up in the executive dining room, and Lebrecht hosted, the president of the bank hosted the dinner. And that was it was great for me and my family, and it was an honor to get that award. And I got to thank Mike for putting me in for that award.
Well, Mario, you mentioned, and from my tenure at Chase, I always felt this, that Chase, although it was a huge company, was a family company at heart. You could approach the senior-most executives and say hello, and also talk about projects they would always be interested in. I remember Tom Lebrecht in particular, and Art Ryan, and I even met David Rockefeller one time. It was, well, I guess, tell us a little bit about David Rockefeller. He was really the face of American banking. He built Chase Plaza in downtown to help revigorate the Wall Street area. Tell us a little bit about David Rockefeller.
Well, he was a legend, obviously. And the one thing with David was that he would intermingle or talk to, you would never know it was David Rockefeller. So I had a habit to go down to work out in our cardiovascular lab in the morning before I went to the office. I'd come into New York, I'd get in like 7 o'clock in the morning, go down to that area, work out. He'd always be down there working out. And he would talk to everybody. And in fact, the one thing I remember, he asked me to teach him how to use a Stairmaster. So I actually taught David Rockefeller how to use a Stairmaster. And, in fact, here I am talking to Mr. Rockefeller, just a lowly kid from New Jersey. That's the way it was at Chase. So
that was his style, and everybody we talked to had a story about David Rockefeller being nice to them and respecting them and their opinion. That really was one of the reasons I think he was so successful.
Right, and I would think a lot of those officers, like Lebrecht, Esposito, all were that way. They didn't put on airs. They all spoke to you as equals, and always were interested in your opinions. And like I told you, they'd meet us down for breakfast, ask us our opinions almost on a daily basis. They'd be down here. Tony Teresiano did it a lot. And we actually look forward to their visits so that we could communicate with them as to what we were thinking about and any problems we had where we thought things could be done better, which was great.
Well, it sounded like the leadership had the great ability to listen.
Yes.
And take it all in before they make their decisions. What a great quality of leadership. Hey, tell us about some of the other people that you worked with that I remember, Art Ryan, and Tom Lebrecht. Tell us a little bit about that leadership team.
Well, Lebrecht and I actually are the same age. He started in the bank about the same time I did. And every time he saw me, he would always remark, about that. Of course, he became the president of the bank. I never would have had that opportunity. But he was such a down-to-earth, friendly individual. And so I always enjoyed talking to him. Art Ryan, I really got to talk to him not as frequently as the others because I really didn't deal with him that much. I did deal with him. Actually, I had an opportunity to fly down with him once on a corporate jet to a conference at Doral Country Club in Miami, which we actually had in an estate, and we were going to have a conference down there. And I had the opportunity to fly in a corporate jet, but then when I found out what the allocation would be to my department, it probably would have wiped out my budget in that one trip. So I decided,
wasn't a free trip.
Wasn't a free trip, so I decided to take the commercial flight. But he was down there for that whole I guess it was several days. We had this conference talking to clients, and actually had the opportunity to play on that golf course before, I forget what, it was a major tournament. And they let us go out and play a day or two before the tournament.
That's great. Hey, Mike Esposito, as you said, had a big impact on your career, and was everything about, what can we do in the future to build up Chase? Tell us a little bit about Mike Esposito.
Well, Mike had a way about him that made you feel comfortable to talk to him, and I still talk to him periodically. He gave me the opportunity to expand insurance. He also backed us up to set up our captive life insurance company and agency in Delaware, which was important. And then he supported all my expansion to go and travel to other areas of the world to see what was going on the risk side and insurance opportunities as well. So being trained on both sides, anytime I went out to a country, I could see opportunities either for a risk side or an income opportunity side. I think one time I went out to Hong Kong, and we had an opportunity to go out to dinner with the country manager, who was at the time Hewlin Fierce. And I remember him. And we had an arrangement to meet down at the docks. Chase had its own junk. They call it junk. It was like a yacht, which they owned. And they took us across the harbor to go to dinner.
Yeah.
Now, if I didn't go out, if I wasn't out there on this particular trip, I never would have known that we owned a junk or a boat.
A boat.
That we were taking out corporate clients and other people on. There was a risk that nobody was aware that we had. So immediately we covered that particular exposure. But if I wasn't there, I wouldn't have seen that exposure. So as you travel around, you would pick up things that you didn't know.
Always so important to go on site, see the operation, see the good, see what needs attention.
Correct.
Mary, you helped build the insurance business. We worked with you, and I was in the credit card division at Chase on some big projects in the 1980s. Tell us a little bit about how you built the insurance business for Chase.
Well, we started off with credit insurance, obviously, and we did very well with the revenue in that area. And then when we set up our captive insurance company, we were able to take advantage of some of the underwriting profits.
And Mary, just talking about how you helped build up the credit card insurance business, which I worked in when I was at Chase, building up some of the credit and some of the consumer insurance programs. Tell us about how you worked on that.
Well, we're always looking for opportunities to expand revenue, fee income. Is the great thing about the insurance marketing opportunities, because you weren't taking on any risk. You were just developing fee income off the customer base you already had. So we talked to different areas within the bank where we saw opportunities. One of the areas was the credit card area. And I think initially with Paul Tung might have been involved. And he started a program with Allstate, an accident type product. And then later on, I talked to Tom Lynch, and I forget, I don't know if he was in charge of it originally, but whoever it was, ran the credit card area, agreed to give us an opportunity to test it out. So we tested it out with the credit coverage that protected from the balance, outstanding balances on a credit card. We had two coverages, one to pay you off in case you died and one to pay the monthly payments if you were disabled. Then we started looking at ways for non-credit related. So we could get a fee income, a marketing income, for utilizing our customer base and paying a premium through the credit card. And we started offering life insurance on hospital income, which basically is the type of product that would pay you if you were disabled so much per day, like $100 a day if you're in the hospital.
Yeah.
Had nothing to do with the medical, but you'd be entitled to it. Those products stayed on the books like forever, because once you set up an automatic payment program, very rarely are they canceled. And it was a fee income that continued on and continued on and continued on and built up. So the executives in that area loved it, and they asked us to keep building it up, and we kept building it up. And it worked out very well there. Then we expanded it before from the credit card area to the mortgage area, to the commercial checking account customers and consumer credit checking account customers. Similar type products. In all of those areas, it worked well. It worked out well domestically, and then we expanded it internationally. So it just went all over the world. And then we set up our division where we had somebody in charge of credit insurance, somebody in charge of mass marketing, domestically, internationally, and worked out. We just built it up. Then subsequently to that, I was appointed to the ABA.
I was going to ask you about you did some major trade association work.
Right, I became the chairman of the ABA Insurance Committee, primarily focusing on insurance products. And we had executives, banks from all over the country that were part of the committee, and we were all assigned to go out and talk about deregulation, to give banks the opportunity to get involved in the insurance area. The funny thing is, some of the banks in the Midwest, like Minnesota, already were grandfathered, where they were acting as agents, doing what we couldn't do, and they're right in the branches selling insurance, never had any conflict of interest questions, etc. And other banks already, we also went after getting into the title business, and there were other banks that were involved in that business as well. So what we were trying to do is to expand our opportunities to be equal to a lot of our competitors who are grandfathered and were doing what we'd like to do in the future. And we always, once we did anything, we always set up our programs to make sure we didn't have any conflict in that regard. We also set up coverages with companies that were sound, stable. They were reviewed by our department, by the legal department, make sure we had no conflicts, make sure that our contracts were protecting Chase as any way that they could. And as far as I recall, in all the years I was involved, we never had any complaints or any litigation against us for tied into those products.
Sure. Hey, Mario, one of the things that you were working on, I remember the attorney we used to work with, Dennis Toynovan, was working on trying to expand sales of insurance across the company. And it was part of the preparation for what was approved in the 90s through the GrammLeachBliley Act, which was a landmark bill to try to be able to cross-sell products across a banking institution and try to emulate some of the things American Express was doing, and I know Citibank was a big proponent of that plan. It didn't really work out the way people thought. What was your thinking in that period, going back, that insurance was going to be one of the things that would have more opportunities if the GrammLeachBliley Act was approved?
Well, we saw again, being involved in the corporate risk side, where we knew what was going on across the bank and all the different operations, where we saw loans being put on the books that needed all kinds of coverage. We saw political risk opportunities where you had a lot of international loans where there were political risk, and you'd have to require political risk to protect the bank. We saw same thing with commercial mortgages and residential mortgages, where you had title risk or title insurance on every loan, where we'd be able to offer that coverage up front, probably save the consumer money by combining some of these things, and still be set up so that you weren't forcing them to buy the coverage from the bank because you don't want any tie-in. Sure. And we're very careful about tie-ins. So everything we did, we went through a series of risk assessments to make sure that we wouldn't be in violation of any federal laws and that we wouldn't have any tie-ins. And again, I can't recall of any situation where we were sued or brought in for litigation. I know the we were shut down on title insurance for a while, but then that was reinstituted after I left the bank. But the banks can now offer title insurance.
Sure, sure. You had a period of time where you did a lot of international work for Chase. You had an executive sent you all over the world that you were telling me about. You went to India, you mentioned Hong Kong and Central America. Tell us a little bit about some of the international programs at Chase that you supported.
Well, I'll give you an example. In Hong Kong, one of our competitors was Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. And I went in and I looked at what they were doing. I always went to see what the competition was doing if I went into some of these countries. They were able to offer commercial tanker risk or whatever it was and require their consumers or borrowers to place the marine insurance with the bank. We, again, were prohibited from even offering it. So we were very concerned about that. What you found out is when you went internationally, the foreign banks were allowed to do a lot of things that we couldn't do as a U.S. bank. Because no matter where we were under our U.S. regulations. So we couldn't do anything other than what was permitted under our regulations, even though our competitors were able to do things that we couldn't do. That in effect put us at a disadvantage. So I found that to be very common across the world. So again, if you want an equal level field, to me, we should all be equal in the way we're allowed to offer our products or the way we're allowed to operate as a bank.
On an international basis, international banking. And Mario, you were at Chase for a lot of history, milestones, good and bad. You mentioned a couple of times the bank was actually physically attacked in the 60s and 70s, and then the day I remember well, in 1987, stock market crashed in October of that year. Stock market went down about 500 points, and then the merger with Chemical Bank were a couple of milestones. Tell us a little bit about being an executive at Chase through days and events like that.
Well, first of all, I was there when they had the riots in New York, and we had a lot of branches in those areas where those riots took place. We used to have a habit to let the local insurance brokers where the branches were located provide the insurance on those branches. When it got after those riots, you couldn't buy insurance. It was almost impossible for these brokers to get the insurance. So we talked to one of our leading brokers and underwriters, and we put together a manuscript insurance product that underwrote all of our properties, a whole bunch of different risks, under one umbrella. And we were able to take away that risk from those local brokers that couldn't provide the coverage, and we were able to protect all our assets. We did the same thing when we had the financial crisis. I always say that we owned half the country. Chase took over projects in Florida that were not completed, projects in Puerto Rico that weren't completed, and in effect, that program that we had to protect the bank assets, we extended on to protect our foreclosed assets. So we're able to handle these unexpected risks that turned up under futuristic type planning by having these programs underwritten and put together to protect the bank. And it came in very handy. So, and then not only did we take over these properties, then we completed those properties and eventually sold them. But I think we were allowed to have them for like 5 years, but some of those projects went on for more than 5 years.
Sure.
But we were able to protect the bank.
And in the late 80s in New York banking, there were a lot of mergers going on. And I remember reading the article in the paper one day that there was an expected merger between 3 banks, between Chase, Chemical, and Manufacturers Hanover. And the first merger was Chemical and Manufacturers Hanover. And then a few years later, Chemical and Chase merged, keeping the Chase name, but the Chemical charter. What was that like, the merger with Chemical? That was a a big change for the organization, its culture?
Well, it didn't affect me very much because I actually retired at the time that the merger took place. But the individual that came over from chemical to run that area, I knew. And in fact, he asked me to stay on, and I stayed on basically doing what I was doing for Chase for him. And I guess you could say every bank we were involved with, in my capacity growing up through the insurance area at Chase, we were interfaced with all these different banks. So we knew all the people that were handling these responsibilities at different banks. So it sort of was not very difficult for me to assimilate into that culture. And as far as the bank goes, I wasn't involved anymore with the trust department in those areas, but I would assume they had a lot of the same cultures.
Absolutely. Now, you did a lot of work in Bermuda.
Yes.
That you described, building a business there. Not the worst place in the world to go on a regular basis. Tell us a little bit about your work in Bermuda.
Well, I was asked to work for the Bank of Butterfield as a consultant. So for almost 11 years, until 2005, I was the consultant for the Bank of Butterfield for risk management and insurance income. And I set up programs for them to get into the credit insurance and the non-credit insurance area, to a point when I left, they were getting enough sufficient revenue where they hired someone to do it full-time on the island. So for those years, I had a work permit to go into Bermuda, and every 3 months I would fly over there and follow up on what I was doing, and I still keep contact with some of the VPs over there. But that was very interesting.
Yeah, that was a neat place. Now, one of the things that really was a big trend when I worked for Chase in the 80s, there were, as we said, hundreds of banks and credit card issuers that mattered. Now there's a half a dozen, and a tremendous number of mergers driven by consumer banking, driven by the technology that the big computers can handle the work of national banking, and it all changed as it went from state banking regulation to national.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about how you saw that happening.
Well, with those expansions, it gave the banks more opportunity to get involved to expand these programs we were talking about. And in fact, you were talking about Bermuda became sort of an international banking capital. And in fact, Chase got involved, I forget approximately when it was, but we couldn't get coverages to protect the bank. The markets were like dried up. So in order for Chase to get coverages, we agreed with, I forget, it was like 15 other banks to set up a company in Bermuda there was two of them. One was called Ace and one was called Excel. And they're now both huge conglomerates. Ace really expanded, and in fact, Mike Esposito eventually became the non-exec chairman of Excel. And Ace is now Chubb. In fact, a member of our country club was a CEO of Chubb before they merged, and he's still a senior executive over at the Ace Chubb combination. His name is Finnegan. The nice thing is, as I had mentioned to you, I also was involved with Seton Hall University in the business school, and I've been pushing for them to get involved in what we call enterprise risk management. It's more than just insurance. You're protecting the risk of the whole corporation. So there's risk inherent in every component of a company, and everybody should in effect be a risk manager, the lowest employee to the head employee. So I worked with the business school, asked me to get involved with, they have international opportunities for their employees to go, students to look at learning experiences. So I set up 2 years in a row learning trip in Bermuda, and for them to learn about what I was learning about enterprise risk management and the fact that insurance is really risk finance.
Yeah.
It's not just insurance buying. So that Mike Esposito set up a program for them at XL where they came in and listened to every one of his department executives to see how insurance was going into the risk finance area so they could learn about that. Then I took them over to the Bank of Butterfield with the CEO and the CFO. Same thing, they set up learning experiences for every one of the students to learn about every division and how it worked in the world of international finance. Then the International Monetary Authority in Bermuda did the same thing. So we're able to go over there as well to introduce the students to international banking, in effect. And then they also learned about the court system. They were shown how the English court system worked, and they got a kick out of that as well. So I did that 2 years in a row. We had opportunities to take students out there. And then I set up a program for them to go to India as well and work to meet Tata executives that were tied into AIG to learn about what was going on in India as far as insurance expansions go. The international thing is, as you travel, like India, and I had been out there several times looking at opportunities with Marsh & McLennan, is the fact that you have very little exposure to liability in India as a company, but a lot of these companies are outside India. A lot of people own assets outside India. But as you know, if I get hit by a car here in the U.S., you're going to sue for millions or whatever it is, a lot of money. Internationally, in most cases, the litigation is not anywhere as near as prevalent as it is here in the U.S. So
I've heard that's a challenge in doing business in China.
Same, no matter where. So as they expand outside their countries, they're not aware of the exposures that they have outside the countries. And we were trying to get into India, the ability to market to the local businesses coverages and executives coverages for outside India where they could protect themselves adequately.
Well, you had a great international experience. I guess the one other area that happened that kind of fueled the mergers was the increase in technology applied to banking, to branch banking, to eliminate some of the paperwork and allow much bigger systems of branches, credit card customers on almost every avenue. And we heard Art Ryan talk about it when he was at Chase last October. How did that work for you in insurance, being able to use technology to be able to better serve customers?
Well, obviously, the automatic deduction of premiums under these insurance products is easy way to collect premiums. It ties in a banking product to the insurance product. And then we were working with the Treasury Department where they would set up claim systems automatic for all insurance companies. So anytime we looked at any opportunity, could be on a health side, could be medical asset accounts. There were opportunities within the banking area where we set up all this new technology and new products tied into technology that tie into new opportunities for insurance.
Yeah. So
I always look for those. Now I don't even know what's going on right now, but I can tell you, I'm on a pretty big hospital board, and these opportunities are becoming very prevalent with all of these networks that are being put together with hospitals that are setting up physician networks and accountable care organizations where they have hundreds of doctors and thousands of patients all tied in together, and they have to track all of the accounts from every patient through the hospital to the insurance company, whether it be Medicare or private insurance. And the banks have the ability to provide products that help solve that problem.
And Mario, in looking at what's happening today in contemporary banking in terms of regulation, deregulation, in terms of new competitors, we were at the Card Forum this spring, and the big talk was the impact of fintech companies that are selectively borrowing or lending to customers, taking some receivables away from the traditional banks. What are some of the contemporary things that you see happening in banks, some of the things you may be concerned about, some of the things that you see as opportunities?
Well, I could say there's a lot of opportunities. If the banks would open up to really getting involved with what we've been talking about, there are different products tied into insurance in effect. Because if you set up the proper products and the proper integration between the corporation you're dealing with and the bank, you're protecting the bank exposures from a credit standpoint, and you're protecting the viability of the companies to continue on, because not many companies have risk managers or brokers that even know anything about risk management. So they're out there probably with a lot of open exposures that if you could tie in the integration of what I call enterprise risk management off the bank's sheet, looking at the clients they're dealing with tied into their lending, the bank's lending portfolio, you're minimizing the exposures to the bank and those companies. And I see that as a great opportunity going forward. Tied into right now with the cyber risk, you're talking about Capital One exposure they had from this one employee. How many companies even look at cyber risk? Smaller companies, and yet it's an exposure to a physician practice. All of the patients
every company has to look at it.
Every company has to look at it, and their brokers probably don't know anything about it. So, again, when I was at Chase, I went on to become I got a professional designation, associate in risk management, because I wanted to expand my knowledge of total risk management. They even are beyond that now. They have programs that are really, really across the board into credit risk management, corporate risk management, enterprise risk management. And one thing we always said was, I remember at Chase when I started there, they had called a salad oil king. They had a major loss. And there was a client who we were lending money to him based on the security we had in one of these tanks where they kept their salad oil. Evidently nobody ever went out there to check to see if the security was in the tank. Anyway, the bank lost a lot of money on this. The guy went under and we had no security. Whatever you can do, whether it be in a hospital or the bank, you can have the greatest products in the world. But one opportunity where somebody's arm is cut off that shouldn't have been cut off, or you didn't protect the bank from a certain exposure that you should have protected. It's all negative publicity.
And talking with Mario Rosellini about his career at Chase. And Mario, you've been doing a lot since you retired, and you've never really retired. You work on a hospital board here in North Jersey, the Chilton Medical Center. You do a lot for the Lions, a great charity, and also for Seton Hall University, your alma mater. You do a lot there. You mentioned about the work you did with their insurance program. Tell us a little bit about some of those products that you contribute so much to.
Well, I've been on the risk committee at Atlantic looking at their risk, so my background helps them out. One of the things that if you probably don't recall, but Chase always promoted their employees to be involved with community work. They used to have Outstanding Citizens Awards every year. So from day one, when I was at Chase, when I started working at Chase, I was heavily involved in my community. I was on a school board. I was involved with JCs. I got involved with flood when we had floods. And then I really got involved a lot with the Lions, which is a great organization that all the money that we earn has to be returned out. There's no money kept on the books. Each year it's given out to the charities that we support. So for instance, in Wayne, we support the disabled student every year, several students for every high school for scholarships. We support the fire department, the Foundation for the Handicapped that we heavily support here in Wayne. We support St. Joseph's School for the Blind, which is the only school in the state of New Jersey that provides these services or in Jersey City. Camp Marcella for the Blind, which is the only camp for the blind, we actually heavily support as well. So anything that has to do with visually impaired, we do. We also provide free eyeglass exams and eyeglasses to all the poor children in our town, recommended by the school nurses. So if the school nurse decides that this person needs an exam or needs eyeglasses, they refer them over to the Lions Club, the doctor that we work with. And then we pay for the glasses and we pay for the exam. So we've been doing that. That's just here in Wayne. And if you can expand that, be it way beyond, we do through the district, we provide capital monies to some of these organizations. They might need kitchen equipment. There's a Century Garden here in Wayne where it was all developed for people that are blind and handicapped. They can go in and feel, touch, smell. And we got carts that can drive people around. And we got that donated from the North Jersey Foundation. The Foundation for the Handicapped needed a new communication system. They put in for a grant. We extended the money for that system through the North Jersey. So whether it's local or through the North Jersey Foundation, we help out organizations and all the needs around here. We also provide, very interesting, eye exams. We have a camera that automatically analyzes your eyes, instantaneously tells you what has to be done to your eyes. So the camera reads it out. We don't even need a doctor.
Wow.
And we go into all preschool, kindergarten kids, and you don't know how many we have found. First of all, most of those kids don't have eye exams. We have found kids that weren't doing well, and the reason they weren't doing well is they needed glasses or they had a problem. So this camera is really helping all of these groups throughout North Jersey, because we're doing it throughout North Jersey.
And that's all the Lions Club. That's a great organization. I really never heard such a detailed description of the work they do.
And then when you travel internationally, all over the world, it's an honor to become a Lion. And I have an award, the Malcolm Holmes Foundation Award. He founded the Lions, and I got the fellowship. It's limited as to who gets them. I got one from our town. Lions Club put in for me to get one, and I got one. So it's a great company. It's a great organization, because what's great about it is it's all going out to the charity. There's no money kept around for partying or anything like that. All that money goes back out. That's great, Amira. That's great to hear. I was aware of Lions. I didn't know all of the work that they do to help children who are visually impaired, so important. Yep. And a great example of what you're doing. Just tell us quickly about, you do a lot of work for the hospital in the area. In the hospital, I've been involved in their quality committee from day one. And not only on the quality committee for Chilton Medical Center, but for the Atlantic system, for all the boards. And what we're doing is focusing in on quality. Remember I was talking about at the bank, if you did something, you screwed up, it affects the reputation of the bank. Well, if you screw up in the hospital, it affects a life. It could be someone dies. So we're really into evaluating the systems, the way people interact, the doctors and nurses and the patients, to make sure that everything is done properly in the hospital, outside the hospital, and before they even do any surgery. To make sure that there's all kinds of checklists, that nobody makes a mistake. And it's unbelievable how our interface with the patients and the doctors, etc., have really affected the reputation of the hospital. We're now ranked, I think we're #1 hospital in the state from quality for the mid-sized hospital. That's like 340 beds or more or less. And we're A-rated as far as quality goes. And recently we just got another thing, if I had my phone I could have showed it, got another award for one of the top hospitals in the country in certain areas for like heart failure, stroke care, etc.
That's great.
I'll give you an example. If the ambulance over here picks up a patient, they think you might be having a stroke. We have the equipment now in the hospital, in the ambulance, that's online with the hospital. One of our hospitals, Overlook, which is in Millburn, New Jersey, Summit, New Jersey, which has one of the top stroke hospitals around. Their doctors are online, viewing the patient in the ambulance, determining whether that patient may have had a stroke. So by the time they arrive at our hospital, the doctors are ready to give them medication. There's a shot they give them.
Wow.
That'll prevent further damage to their cells. So therefore you're limiting the amount of brain damage. And then if it's really needed, they'll rush them over to Overlook.
Well, when seconds matter.
No question about it.
Mario, and let me ask you, you had an extensive career in the insurance business, building up the insurance business and opportunities for the Chase Bank. Why do you recommend, or would you recommend to a young person in college or even graduate school to go in and pursue insurance risk management as a career opportunity?
Well, as I mentioned before, if you're in the risk management side, it's so varied. It's not boring at all, because you're involved with every component of that corporation or business entity that you're dealing with, because you have to know the risk throughout that organization. So you're going to learn about every component of the operation. In fact, one of the things we did to evaluate risk is we could look at a balance sheet, a financial statement of a company, and start picking up all the where we see exposure just by looking at the balance sheet. That's the kind of thing that makes it very interesting. When I took these students to Bermuda, they couldn't believe several of those students went into that field after that trip. So it's not boring at all. It's very exciting.
Very precise field. The risk management study and the exams are difficult, but they're so important.
They're important. I remember we were involved with the stadium they were building out in San Francisco when they needed project finance. And you had to protect the income stream for the bondholders. Well, there was components within that income stream that had to be protected to make sure that they would get paid. And we put together a risk finance program for that, make that deal go through. So there's a lot of these programs can really make things happen, let's put it that way. And I couldn't think of a more interesting, you get to meet all kinds of people, you get to learn. It's never boring, because you're learning, like I talked to you about, one day you're with the racehorses, next day you're with a corporate jet, so you never know what you're going to be doing. And I think it's an exciting area. More and more people are looking at that as an opportunity for a career.
Tremendous. You're a tremendous advocate and representative of the insurance industry, and also your career at Chase Bank. Now, maybe to finish up our chat today, some of the people you mentioned, folks like Tom Lynch, David Rockefeller, Art Ryan that you worked with, that I knew, and Mike Esposito, and someone we worked with, haven't mentioned yet, Mitch Ayrton, who was a leader in the insurance department when I was there. We did a lot of good work with Mitch. And tell us a little about him and some of the other key people that you worked with.
Well, Mitch Ayrton was my boss for a few years. and he was a hands-on person, but also let me do my thing. And he had a lot of faith in what I was doing, and that really made me feel great. So I would say he was one of the best bosses I ever had. Bob Douglas was also another boss I had that was really good. I used to deal with him when he was over at Milbank, and then he became the head of our general counsel, and then became the head of national positioning. Actually, for about a year, I reported directly to him in national positioning for where we were going with insurance. So he was a great person to deal with. He died not too long ago. But here's another one. I'll give you an example. My son graduated law school, passed the bar in New York and New Jersey. And when they pass the bar in New York, they get sworn in Albany. Bob Douglas was Secretary of State under Nelson Rockefeller. He was involved when they had the riots up in Attica, wherever it was, the prison.
Attica, yeah.
And anyway, he was Secretary of State, so I told him I was going up there with my son. He said, he set up a tour of the state capitol for my son and his fellow graduates that were there from Seton Hall Law School. And then they took us into the room where all the pictures of the Secretaries of State in New York were, and there's Bob's picture up there.
Wow.
So that's the kind of people, officers and superiors you dealt with at Chase that would do those kinds of things.
And Mario, it seems in chatting with you, the family atmosphere of Chase stands out. The leadership it had in the banking and then in the insurance community, not just in New York, the United States, but worldwide stood out. And I think everyone who's been at Chase is proud of that they were at Chase. I know I am for my years there. Is there one other thing that stands out for you at Chase from your career?
I say I know I didn't mention a lot of people, but I see a lot of the people I dealt with or interfaced with at our Chase alumni meetings. They were all great. I'm also involved with the Chase alumni on helping them out with their insurance. But everybody on the upside was great. The bank was well respected no matter where you went and traveled to. Chase was like a respected name. And I couldn't have thought of a better place for me to work. If I had to do it all over again, I'd say how lucky I was that I got to work with a company like Chase, and I got to meet the people that I got to know at Chase. But there's a lot of people I didn't even work with on a daily basis that became friends of mine, like Ralph Aiello, Dennis Clavey, a whole bunch of Charlie Farrell, John Farrell, who passed away recently. He was the head of HR. All these different people, there's hundreds and hundreds of names. Harry Appleknap, who was involved with the Western Hemisphere, he was a great supporter of me going into Puerto Rico and Latin America and South America. So there was always somebody that would listen to you, and if they thought you were heading in the right direction, they would support you and give you the opportunity to do what you thought was right. And they would tell you if you didn't do right, they would tell you. But in most cases it worked out well.
Relationships mattered, and pride in the organization mattered. So good to hear about that, Mario Rosellini. And I appreciate when I was at the bank, you were so helpful to me when we were in the credit card business, learning how to market insurance products, and card business was growing, and you were always so good to work with, teaching us the business and being a little patient at times with us. But I have to say thank you for that. And I just appreciate the chance to chat with you here at the beautiful North Jersey Country Club, where you are a very fine golfer. And I know you're going to be looking forward to getting back on the course very soon. But Mario, thank you very much, and great to chat with you today.
Just one more thing. I had also a great team working with me. Bill Duncan, one of the nicest people you'd ever deal with. Joe Palazzola, Rich Schwartz, some of these people I still see. We get together. Cameron Bruce, Phil Zucala. We get together for lunch every quarter in New York. And we reminisce about the old days. I have a picture at home. It looked like the Supreme Court of all of the people that were involved in our Chase insurance area that went beyond and headed up risk management departments at other institutions. So I know I'm not mentioning a lot of names, and hopefully nobody will be.
We'll have to do it again so that everybody who you wanted to talk about, and come to mind after you have the chance.
You have to do it before I pass away.
No. Mayor Rosellini, a vice president at Chase Bank, division executive, many years, 40 years serving the bank and its customers at Chase, and a wonderful career, which continues in his work for the Lions Club, with the Chilton Hospital, and with his alma mater, Seton Hall University. Mario, pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting.
Okay, and this is Ken Kraetzer for CBSI Services, talking business with our affiliation with the Chase Alumni Association. Thank you for watching.